Um, Hi, Will Zockman here. Canopus Research Incorporated is my company. Blog is semiotic.com, semiotic.com. This is actually just an intro to what will be a series of these that will essentially be working notes for what will become a paper down the road, and maybe at some point even a book. But it really has to do with the deconstruction of Max Tegmark. Max is an interesting fellow with a lot of interesting ideas, in most of which he's severely dead wrong. The basic hypothesis I'm working with here is that Max is essentially characterizable as a fellow who has built his career with the contemporary equivalent of becoming one of the world's greatest specialists in epicycles. Epicycles, of course, is a reference to the lead up to the Copernican revolution 600 years ago, roughly, that refers to the dominant model of cosmology that had been church doctrine and required of all scientists or wannabe scientists for something like 1,200 years. And that was a view of the world, or of the universe, really, of all of what is, as being characterized by a geocentric version of cosmology in which the sun, the moon, the stars, everything rotated around the Earth. And the Earth, because that's what it said in Genesis, God created Earth and then made a dome of heaven over it. The flat Earth people still thump that tub today, silly as it is. But the problem that developed over the centuries was that as people started to, with folks like Francis Bacon in the 12th century, I guess it was, as they started to actually pay attention to what was going on out there, it was pretty clear that this model of the universe, in which not only were they rotating around the Earth, but they were all in circular orbits, because all orbits had to be circular because circles were perfect and were from God, whereas eccentric orbits, elliptical orbits, to the extent to which anybody was aware of them at all initially, were creatures of the devil, because only the devil would make something as imperfect as an ellipse. And so you had, Giordano Bruno burnt at the stake. You had others, Galileo exiled. There really was quite a persecution for a period of time of these people who had other points of view that led to the, relatively speaking, the modern scientific revolution eventually. Newton and the rest of them contributing later on. But as pointed out correctly by Theodore Kuhns, and as noted also by others, there was quite a scientific revolution that took place. It was not instantaneous. It wasn't like one paper was, published or circulated, or one idea was circulated, and all of a sudden the scales fell from everybody's eyes. It was a rather long, painful transition, especially painful for the people who were persecuted by the church, then turned them over to the civil authorities and had them do terrible things sometimes to them. But although Max Tegmark thinks of himself as being, very much outside the box and so forth, he's not. He's not. He is basically not engaging in none of his stuff is engaging in any kind of movement forward to a new paradigm. In fact, he denies that there is any need for a new paradigm. But it is instead the equivalent of rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic of the old paradigm that is dying. And the paradigm that is already in the process of dying, although in the early stages of it, is the paradigm of so-called standard model physics and relativity theory and quantum theory, quantum mechanics. Tegmark's career has been marked by his attempts, as one of several people, but he's one of the more successful, to basically explain away the problems in matching the standard theory and related stuff, relativity theory and quantum theory, in matching that to the observed realities and in the absurdities that it generates, Big Bang, black holes, and dark matter and energy, and all this stuff. Tegmark at no point questions this, just like the people who were trying to rescue the old geocentric model at no point questioned the basic model. They simply were working very hard to try to find some way to fit the observed facts to the theological requirements of it. Now, I'll have some comments on later ones on Max's theology. Max definitely is a true believer, as much so as any of the, church authorities that insisted on the on the geocentric model back there. And he's been desperately trying to come up with his own version, contemporary version of epicycles, where he relies on a lot of the mythologies and wrong-headed ideas of the fallout from the standard model, etc., and the difficulty in making it work. And I will be talking about that in some detail further on. He is totally confused, for example, about consciousness and about the relation between reality and observation and theorization. And in his that he's had this huge emotional investment in what he calls the mathematical universe, the idea that the universe is mathematics somehow, fundamentally. Dead wrong, completely dead wrong. The guy is, this is matched only by his obvious egotism, his anger over not having gotten a Nobel Prize all by himself yet. He in the mathematical universe, he has this thing that he talks about how he has, developed two personae, sort of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He does aw shucks Dr. Jekyll when he's trying to be polite and accepted, but he really likes Mr. Hyde. He also doesn't like human beings, that's very clear, including himself. He's got this incredible, angry, nasty Mr. Hyde inside of him, which he identifies with as his own. We'll be looking at that as well. But he completely confounds and confuses himself over the way things actually work. He thinks that somehow reality, our individual reality, is something that's, quote, inside our heads. That's ridiculous. He completely fails to understand how the thing really works. And he fails to understand that what's really going on in the human nervous system is, as in the nervous systems of animals and others, is a construction of models of the world, obviously simplified. He makes some absurd statements at times, as if at one point he talks about how Einstein, originated the notion of mathematical basis for the universe. Duh. Sorry, Max, but certainly that goes back at least to Plato and probably millennia before. He's got an ahistorical sense. He's so enamored of himself and so angry about so many things. He argues, for example, with consciousness, he likes sickness. He likes nuts. He doesn't realize that the normal development for a human being is to be pretty successful at creating a kind of understanding of the world around us. He also, because of a lot of his nutty ideas, doesn't realize that quite obviously the development of sentient beings like us has been a long process over a very, very long period of time. He sort of gives lip service to it, but then he doesn't really believe in it because he's got this he relies so much on this, the quantum reduction to create gazillions of parallel universes, and that's another one of his big hobby horses that he rides. Another variation on his attempts to, come up with enough epicycles to save the flawed basic model. Can't be done. It can't be done. The basic model, the notion of some grand unified theory that marries quantum theory and relativity, not going to happen. Never happened, because the model is flawed. But he completely misunderstands the role of mathematics in all this. He doesn't understand that science is approaching the world, the real world, much the same as all of us individually are, by trying to create some viable models of it that can then be of some reasonable predictive value, and that they get better and better. A healthy human development, not a nut or not somebody who is, schizophrenic or whatever, the kind that he seems to enjoy much more, I think because of his hostility toward human beings, fundamental hostility toward human beings. That the normal case of things is one in which human beings are reasonably successful at comprehending certain aspects of the real world, just like scientific theory gets good at comprehending certain aspects of the real world. But of course, he puts the priority on scientific theory. I mean, here's a guy who obviously thinks that it's more accurate. It would be more accurate to say, pass the sodium chloride to pass the salt, and that it would somehow be more accurate to then say it in terms of the composition of the atoms in sodium and chlorine, or the below that down to whatever, this maybe string theory or something like that. But the guy is so wrong-headed, and anybody who follows Max Tegmark is following the Pied Piper of the past, is following somebody who has deep religious commitments, worshiping the very Moloch that he warns against in a way, and that he is he's actually a retro nominal realist. Only the nominal, the realism here is in mathematics, and his arguments are ridiculous. And I'll be deconstructing some of those arguments as we go along, also. But so for the moment, the main point I'm making here is that Max Tegmark is not a open-minded thinker who's moving forward into the future. He is a very close-minded doctrinaire, although in a kind of anti-way, the opposite of the what he thinks of himself. But he's completely confined within the limits of a very, very deeply flawed theory, given what's now coming available, what will be coming available. Well, it's already partly coming available and will be spectacularly occurring over the next 100 years or so. It takes a while to get through these transitions. So, Max Tegmark, I'm coming after you, dude, and I'm going to take you apart, because you are not who or what you think you are. You ain't so smart as you think you are, fella. And we're going to deconstruct you, and you're not going to be able to ignore this. So I'll look forward to debating with you at some time in the future. Will Zachman, Canopus Research Incorporated. Blog is semiotic.com, semiotic.com. Also semiotic on Rumble, which is my primary place for posting, although I will probably have this up on YouTube as well. If you'd give a like, tell your friends to have a look. We're going to have a lot of fun deconstructing and demolishing Max Tegmark's nonsense over the next week or two. And then it'll be, eventually I'll pull these together. These are really kind of raw notes videos. And then I will be putting them into a paper that may eventually become a book. We'll see about that, but certainly a paper, probably originally kind of an informal paper, and then I'll do one with proper academic citations and references further down the road. those will be posted to academia.edu and made available elsewhere. So until then, hope we're off to a good start, and I'll look forward to talking with you all again before.